Welcome. My name is Brendan Burnett, and I am NAAIA's Director of Professional Development, and I'll be assisting the webinar today. Wanted to let you know before we get started that you will have the opportunity to ask questions throughout the broadcast. You can do so using the question box at the bottom of your screen or the chat function, and we will be answering all the questions during a Q&A period at the end. And it's now my privilege to introduce NAAIA board member Reggie White. Reggie White is the General Manager for Cigna Government and Education. Welcome, Reggie.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm happy to be here. On behalf of the NAAIA National Board and our members and partners from around the country, welcome each and every one of you, and thank you for your engagement and participation in this NAAIA's third of 4 major web series planned for Black History Month. Of course, we extend a very special thank you to NAAFA, the platform host, and a true partner and friend to NAAIA. Our theme for these sessions is Now is the Time. We ask speakers and each of you to embrace this theme as a challenge and a call to action as we individually and collectively work to drive the change we wish to see in this industry. We are honored and very pleased to have this opportunity to hear from our keynote speaker, Mr. Ron Busby. Please allow me to share a few highlights from Ron's bio. As President and CEO of the U.S. Black Chambers, Ron Busby brings business management skills as well as a lifetime of community development experience to the organization. Mr. Busby is a former successful business owner himself, and he has been recognized as one of the nation's best CEOs. Ron grew his first company, USA Super Clean, from $150,000 in annualized revenue to over $15 million in only 10 short years. Early on in his career, USA Super Clean was recognized as the largest Black-owned janitorial firm in the country. Mr. Busby has also started and grown 2 other janitorial firms, both resulting in over $4 million in annualized revenue. Please refer to the information provided for Ron's full bio, but we certainly welcome Ron today to our broadcast. Ron?
Good morning, everyone, and I apologize if you hear any background noise. I am in a public space trying to make sure that we get this opportunity to talk a little bit about the history of African-American businesses, but more importantly, where we are today and what you as NAAIA members can do to keep helping moving us forward. So I'll start by saying again, happy Black History Month to all of you, and I'll try to keep the presentation going as quickly as possible. So you can go to the next slide. So to tell you a little bit about the U.S. Black Chamber, we were founded literally 10 years ago next month, March of 2009. So we are celebrating our 10-year anniversary. When we began in 2009, there were 6 chambers of commerce that joined the U.S. Black Chamber. Today, we have over 140 chambers across the country. We're in 40 states, including the continent of Africa, both North Africa as well as South Africa. And we have a membership base of over 300,000 Black-owned businesses across the country, everything from your smallest to some of the largest Black businesses across the globe. Next slide, please. When we began moving to Washington, D.C. from Phoenix, Arizona, what really surprised me was as we drove around the city and you looked at the back of our license plate, it literally reads taxation without representation. And for African-American businesses as well as African-Americans, that has been truly our conversation for decades. We have been paying into a system that really didn't meet or even address our needs as it referenced to business ownership. And so the U.S. Black Chamber first started its first pillar, as we say, in reference to advocacy and or as in today's environment, policy, because we understand the importance of policy. Our second is really access to capital. If you ask any business owner, their number one concern, it will be access to capital. But as you talk to Black business owners and you ask them their top 1, top 2, and top 3 concerns, it will be access to capital. And even when we do receive the capital that we need, we're typically paying twice the rate for the same capital with the same credit scores, the same business acumen, as well as the same ownership. We typically pay around 20% for our interest versus our white peers that pay 10%. So the U.S. Black Chamber has been one of the organizations that has been behind the Black Bank movement And thus, we have now created a relationship with one of our larger Black banks, Liberty Bank, to provide access to capital for our members, for consumers, for credit as low as 10% or 9.96%, with credit scores as low as 580. But you can also, as a business owner now, be guaranteed a line of credit up to $500,000, guaranteed 50% of that loan by the SBA. Our third pillar is really about what most business owners are looking for, and that is contracting opportunities. And so the U.S. Black Chamber looks at that from three different vantage points. Where is the government spending its dollars? Where's corporate America spending its money? And most importantly, the third, where are African Americans spending its dollars? And so we try to provide resources, relationships for all of those, even for African American consumers. We have now created a mobile app that you can download free of charge to your mobile phone that provides up to 111,000 Black-owned businesses. That's GPS driven, so you can find them anywhere in the country, any industry, any location. So there's no reason for us not to be able to circulate our dollars back in our communities more often. We all have heard the story that the Asian dollar stays in their community roughly 28 days. The Hispanic dollar stays in their community 21 days. And the data is ever so alarming that the dollar only stays in the African American community less than 6 hours. And so with that in mind, we've created this to try to circulate that dollar more frequently in our community. Usually you hear a lot about us having that $1 trillion of spend power, but typically it's not African Americans saying that. It's usually people from outside our community saying they have $1 trillion. How can we market to them to get that? And so for us, we've just tried to change the dialogue and the conversation that to say, how can we keep that within our community? Our fourth one is about entrepreneurial training. The statistics state that of the businesses that are doing less than $100,000, which is 99.9% of our firms, they have no continuing education. But those firms that are doing above $1 million all have a continuing education platform. And so we say that one of the key ingredients for success in our communities is to continue to learn. What got you here is not going to grow your firm. And so with that in mind, we continue to educate our businesses. We have a partnership with the University of Phoenix, which is an online platform. So our businesses now can continue to do the work that they need to do to grow their businesses while taking online classes, which will not interfere with their normal daily activity and lives. Our last one is what we do across the country for all of our chambers, which is chamber development. And so we work with our local chambers, state and regional chambers, to provide them with best practices so that they can go back to their local communities and have the greatest impact to move our communities forward as it relates to business. And so that's kind of who we are. Next slide. Next two slides, actually. And so what I'd like to do now is to kind of go into what the U.S. Black Chamber has found. There's conversations that go around the country that most Black businesses are small. Most Black businesses are not mom and pop, but mom or pop. The data states that the average Black-owned business today is doing less than $55,000 a year. Actually, $54,860 is the average annualized revenue for a Black firm. We hear that all the time, and we think of ourselves as being small and not relevant. U.S. Black Chamber did a survey of its members across the country and found different data. Our businesses have been in business on average 5 years. They have 7 employees or more, and they're doing $1.2 million in annualized revenue each year. That's a total different concept and conversation than what we have heard over the last several years. If you look at the population of African Americans, we represent about 13% of the population of the United States, but really only own about 9% of the firms in the United States. So we are under-indexed in reference to ownership of businesses as it relates to our peers from other communities. Other than the Hispanic community, we probably have the fewest number of businesses, but our data shows us that when a business decides to join a local chamber or the U.S. Black Chamber, Typically, they have a larger revenue, a larger employer base, and larger number of contracts that they've received. Next slide, please. So what we're going to do here today is talk a little bit about where we are, how we're going to grow, and continue to move our communities forward. As it states here, the key characteristics of Black-owned businesses who participated in the survey that we did, 45% of the firms are in professional services. And we'll show you why that's important. About 58% of the firms that were surveyed have been operating for 5 years or more. And about most of our businesses are doing, on average, $1.2 million in annualized revenue. Next slide, please. Now I'd kind of like to talk about the idea that corporate America says, well, we'd love to do more business with Black firms, but we can't find them. We don't know where they are, and they don't have the size and scale to be able to go after some of our larger contract opportunities. In today's environment, the opportunity to compete may be outside your backyard. It may not be in your local community. It may not even be in your state. As the government and corporate America is looking to do larger deals, they no longer have the opportunity to find the small needle in the haystack or to do business with a small minority or woman-owned firm. It is requiring us to do business outside of our local communities. And so you'll look at the data and you'll see that, well, most of our firms that were surveyed here are doing business in at least 2 states, and many of them even over the concept of 5 states. We have to, as business owners, look outside of the places where we've historically done business to go after firms. As African Americans in the past, we've many times migrated where the opportunities are, and I say we have to get back to that thinking in the future. Next slide. If we look at where the real opportunities are from corporate America and how we can move our agendas, it really is about that mid-tier firm that's doing somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000. If we can get those firms to do double the amount, we'll be able to double the output of Black firms, which then will allow us to hire additional employees. If you understand the number one concern in the Black community today is unemployment. There's roughly 2 million unemployed African Americans today, even with the low unemployment numbers that are going on around the country. But there's still 2 million of us that don't have jobs or are underpaid. That's the bad news. The good news is there's 2.6 million African American businesses today. Simple math says if each one of those firms could hire one additional employee that looks like them, we could change the unemployment number to eliminate it 100%. Not concerned with who's in the White House or what the Congress's budget is. If we just talk about that $1 trillion of spend that we have in our community, we have the impact that we need. Next slide. If you ask what is the size of the average firm and the largest contract that they've had, corporate America will also tell you, well, most Black firms are only doing business on small scales. And we say, well, based on our data, many of our firms are doing business in that range of 50,000 to 200,000, about 21% of our firms. If we could get those firms to do the $200,000 to $500,000, which would then take us to somewhere around 30–40% of our businesses, we could truly have an impact on what the country could do in reference to our firms. Next slide. As it was stated before, I was in janitorial service. I was in an industry that wasn't necessarily sexy, wasn't technically, wasn't a technical firm, it wasn't a new firm, but it was a business in which we all needed. I had worked at both IBM and Xerox and had been a senior VP at Coca-Cola, but the one thing I found was there's always going to be the need for certain industries. And so when I got into made the decision to do what I did, I looked at an industry that would always allow new entry, low level of expense to get into the business, but with technology and with business acumen, I was able to grow my firm, as it was discussed, from $150,000 a year to ultimately over $21 million a year, growing from 5 employees to over 700. But the question still begs, what industries are we in? And so based upon the data that's below, you'll see that most of our firms are in professional services. Good news is many of those professional services are doctors and lawyers and accountants, but it also means that a lot of those are consultants. And as consultants go, many of those people were employed by corporate America before, either were retired or let go, or gave some type of package. They decided to leave and typically are doing the same business they were doing before, but are now consultants. And so we have to say, okay, as a consultant, I got to pay my own overhead, taxes, health insurance, and many times they're ending making less money, working more hours. And so we have to be very, very diligent when we're deciding what businesses that we're going in, and we got to make sure that those businesses are profitable. Next slide. About 60%, 58.9% of all African-American firms are in the lowest 20% of the sales generating industries. I'm sorry, lowest 20 of the lowest industries. And so I say again, we have to consider what businesses we're going in to ensure that we have profitable firms that will allow us to have sustainability in our communities. Next slide. In past, and I know a lot of firms felt it here recently, many of our Black firms were doing business with the government. The government obviously is the largest procurer of supplies and products. And so many of our firms were able to do business with the government because there were several programs set to provide minorities and women the opportunity to do business with them. Based upon the data that we see, about 14, 15% of our firms are doing business with the government. But the good news is about 20% of them are doing business with other businesses. And as we continue to grow that number, as well as the number with corporate America, that's where we will have the greatest opportunities. But also, as I discussed earlier, many of our businesses are selling to consumers, that B2C, that business to consumer opportunity. And as we, as African Americans, continue to believe and implement the Buy Black campaign, we will have the largest impact without changing policy, either in the corporate culture or the government culture. The average African American is spending less than 3% of its money with other Black firms. If we could change that from a 3% to a 10%, just 7% increase, we would be mandated in this country, not just African Americans, but we would be mandated in this country to hire 1 million new employees. And so when we deliberately spend with other Black firms, that is truly how we change the conversation. Next slide, please. So what the U.S. Black Chamber did was we said, well, in order to have impact, we needed to have, as we discussed, SMART goals. And I'm sure all the people on the call understand the SMART goals. And so we got together with 24 other organizations and created what we now call Black Wealth 2020. It was created in 2016 after the election, second election of President Obama. And as opposed to saying, hey, let's go to the administration and tell the administration what it should be doing for African Americans, we decided to get together to say, what could we do collectively to change the outcome of African American communities? And so we tried to make sure that they were specific, they were measurable, attainable, realistic, and we had timetables on it. And so thus Black Wealth was created. If you look at the number one concern that we have other than unemployment, it will be home ownership. We lost more of our home ownership and more of our liquidity as well as wealth over the last 20 years when the housing market collapsed. And I tell people all the time, it had little to do with us not having financial literacy as much as it did with the rules of the game being changed without notifying us. And so what we've done is we're partnering with NAAIA, National Association of Real Estate Brokers, those that are Black, to say we are going to create 5 million new Black homeowners by the year 2020. We understand that when we own homes, we now have the ability to be able to take out mortgages for additional business loans. We can send our kids to colleges that we typically cannot afford with student loans. We have the ability to now be able to start businesses and grow. We have to own homes. Our second one really is about business ownership. Currently, when we started this, we were at 1.9 million African-American owned businesses. The goal was to get that to 4 million or 3.9 million African-American owned businesses. I'm proud to say that over the last 2 years, we've grown that number from 1.9 to 2.6 and counting. The goal also was, though, to increase the annualized revenue of those firms. When we began, the average annualized revenue for an African-American business was roughly $74,000. Today, that number has dropped to $54,000, but many of those firms didn't open up January 1st. They opened up throughout the year. So a lot of that just to deal with when those firms were open throughout the year, and many of those were startup firms. But again, as the businesses and members of our organization, we average in the $1 million range. And our third one is really about credit. The new conversation in today's market is about e-commerce. I'm standing in a hotel lobby at the Penn Hotel across the street in New York City. But if I didn't have credit, I couldn't get a room here. If I didn't have credit, I couldn't get an airplane ticket to fly to New York on Southwest Airlines without going to the counter and paying cash. Without credit, I couldn't even get an Uber to get me to the hotel. Only 40% of African Americans today have credit. And as I discussed before, we're paying twice the rate for it. And we're extremely happy when we get it, even though typically it's not enough for us to start and have sustainable businesses. I'll give you a great example. I was talking to a business owner last night who went to a bank, a traditional bank, had a great business plan, had contracts in hand, went saying, hey, I need a $100,000 line. They said, after reviewing all of his documentation, well, we'll give you 40,000. As African Americans, we're typically saying, great, I'll take the 40 and I'll do what I can. I'll make chicken out of chicken salad, or I'll make chicken salad out of the chicken parts. He took the $40,000, ended up not having enough money that he needed, ended up failing and going out of business. They took that same business plan that he had created, gave it to a white peer of his, a competitor, gave that white peer a $150,000 line of credit, and now that business is up and sustainable. We have to have conversations with our business owners to understand they need to have relationships with banks early on, and they need to know exactly what the funding is that they need before going to the banks if they have a sustainable business model and business plan. That's kind of who the U.S. Black Chamber is. Again, we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. We'll be at our national conference at the National Gaylord between the dates of August 19th and August 21st. Kind of open for questions. Hello? Hello?
You're still there. I think we're waiting.
We're still here. Checking now to see what questions we have coming in, and I would encourage anyone on the phone who has a question, please post it now, and we'll present those to Ron. While we wait for some additional questions to come in, Ron, as I listen to your presentation, could you talk a little bit about some of the things that, occur within your membership base that allows those members to have annualized revenues on average of 1.2 million, how that distinct difference happens, right? They have set themselves apart from the norm in terms of that average number that we see or we're used to looking at. So what kinds of attributes do we see in the Black Chamber members?
Great question. And I think 10 years ago, we had a different model. We had a different mix. We have now said that education is extremely important for our business members, continuing education. What education got you here is not going to get you to that next level. And so we have provided free online education. We also talk a lot about joint ventures. So we put 2 and 2 small firms together in many cases to now make 4 or 1 large firm. And so the number of our businesses has decreased, but the size of those firms have grown. we've also been able to do some distinct matchmaking opportunities. So we were able to go to our corporate partners, challenge them to spend more, and they were able to come back to us and say, you find that source for us. We'll give you the opportunity, Ron. You go find that. I would say that when I was in business, there used to be the opportunity to submit an RFP, an RFQ, an RFI, and small businesses had the opportunity to submit that, and corporate America, as well as government agencies, had the resources and the people and the time to be able to look through all of those proposals to find those great small businesses. Those days are changing to the point now where they're bundling contracts, so they're putting 2, 3, 4 opportunities, small, mid-sized opportunities under one big umbrella, and now forcing small businesses to partner or to joint venture to be able to go after those opportunities. And that's what the U.S. Black Chamber has done specifically to help them make those needs. We've been able to put those businesses together to be able to go after those opportunities. So a combination of providing the resources, the acumen, and skills that they need, as well as the real contract opportunities for them to go after.
Thank you, Ron. A follow-up question. We often hear, even on the insurance side, where are the African-American professionals when it comes to the question of, hiring and getting more African-Americans into the industry and certainly getting more African-Americans into higher level positions. When you think about the where are you question from your perspective in terms of the strong African-American businesses that I saw your directory as I went out to the website. First question is, do you have to be a member of the Black Chamber to be in that directory? And going back to the where are you question.
Yes, so to utilize the directory is free of charge. Anyone, any consumer can download it to an Android or an iPhone. First question. Second question is, if you want to list your business in the directory, it's just like any other Yellow Pages or any other directory. There is a small investment of $40 a year, which is typically the lowest price you can do over a 12-month period of time to get your firm listed. And as you want to list more information and have dual locations, or you want to have your website or photos or Yelp conversation, the price goes up, but it's still a minimal investment for your firm to be listed.
Okay, thank you. I just FYI, some of the agents that may be on the phone, I looked at that directory. If my look was correct, it looked like there was only like a dozen or so agents out there, so there's a lot of opportunity to be in that directory and part of that resource base. Here's a question that's come in. I'll read it verbatim. Based on your demographic data, does most of your programming and services benefit those larger, more established Black-owned business, or is there an ROI for the mom and pops to maintain membership?
Great question. And I would say with the local small business mom and or pop, that's where our local Black chambers participate, support, provide the resources and trainings that they need. For the U.S. Black Chamber member, our members are usually larger in scale, looking to do business on a national level. And so we provide a different level of support for those firms. But the local firms, the mom and or pop or mom and pop, I would recommend that they join their local chamber to get the kind of support that they need. And we have 140 of those throughout the country. Okay.
Next question. Are there any, what do you see as the synergy between like NAAIA and a U.S. Black Chamber? And part of that, I think, is behind this question is knowing that, insurance and risk management becomes really a cornerstone of any business being sustainable and viable over the long term. Insurance is a critical piece of that. And so have you established any partnerships within the insurance risk management arena that's part of the success story that you're talking about this morning?
Great question. We partnered with New York Life, and many of you guys may know Eugene Mitchell. He wrote the 7 Steps for Creating Black Wealth. We went across the country with him and his agents as they made a commitment of creating $50 billion of insurance policies for African Americans on the personal side.
Mm-hmm.
On the business side, we partnered early on with firms to provide general liability insurance and bonding. For many Black firms, bonding is a huge challenge, and sometimes, and many times, it's extremely expensive, and it curtails the opportunity for Black businesses to go after a lot of the contracts because they just can't afford the insurance and bonding. And so we looked at various organizations to be able to provide competitive bonding and or insurance. But as of late, we do not have a partner, corporate partner to provide that for us.
Okay. I'm looking through any of, just 1 second. Are there opportunities for small African-American education firms to provide fee-based continuing education to the industry? And how saturated is that market, in your opinion?
I think education is never overly saturated. I think we need more than we need less or fewer. My mom is a previous educator. I read something literally daily. And for those firms that are trying to increase their revenue, they understand that it starts with education. And so for those businesses that are looking to provide education, additional acumen for small and or Black businesses, I think there's always a need. I think in our communities, we're looking for opportunities and options. Many of our business owners don't want to go to a traditional college and or community college to get those resources. And so as there are options and flexibility, as well as locations that they can go to both locally as well as virtually, I think that's always a need. And no, there unfortunately aren't enough options for Black business owners to do that. Again, we partnered with the University of Phoenix. That partnership will be up at the end of this year. And so we, as an organization, are also looking, but I know that our local chambers around the country are also looking for partners to provide business acumen and resources for their local business.
Okay.
Hey, Ron, Reggie White, can you share for the independent agents out there and small business owners, as you grew your janitorial companies over that time period to, several $1 million of revenue and earnings, what would you speak to as kind of some light bulb moments for you? I'm certain you had a tremendous plan and worked hard and networked and had all the business acumen to grow that business. But is there anything from a minority small business perspective that really kind of the light bulb came on and this is something I need to do and emulate, and other folks can certainly do the same thing to be successful?
You kind of hit the nail on the head. So I left corporate America, had no idea how I was going to grow the firm, but I had a vision that I wanted to double my revenue each year. So we first started off, we're doing $150,000. Wasn't that difficult to get to 300. I was a sales guy, wore white shirts, spoke the King's English in an industry that was very labor intensive. To go from 300,000 to 750 wasn't that difficult. I got involved in some local city opportunities to go from 750 to 750,000 to 1.5. I got involved in some state contracts across the state of California. To go to 3 million, I got involved in what was an SBA, Small Business Administration program called the 8A program. It was a pseudo set-aside program, but it was a competitive program for minority firms. So it was kind of an opportunity. It was a program set up by the Republicans under Reagan to provide opportunities, under Nixon, to provide opportunities for Black-owned businesses and minority firms to grow. I was able to grow my firm there to about $7 million. I got there. I didn't know how I was going to get to that next level. I ended up reading a book. The name of the book is Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? It was by an African-American, Reggie Lewis, first African-American billionaire and my frat brother. And it literally changed how I looked at things. And I tell people this all the time. We no longer have the ability to grow our firms organically. So the days of I'm going to start a business, I'm going to grow it, and hopefully at some point in time I'm going to sell it, that just takes too long. It's challenging and it's difficult. I tell people all the time, part of the problem in our African-American business community is we have very few firms that have second generation ownership. If you look at the Black Enterprise Top 100 list, most of those firms are on there for 9, 10, 11 years and then fall off the map because there's no real succession plan. And so I tell folks, as opposed to starting firms, let's go acquire firms. And it don't have to necessarily just be other African-American firms. Right. There are traditional white owners, Hispanic owners, Asian owners who own businesses that are also looking to transition out. And so I tell folks, hey, that's a new strategy. And so when I grew and continued to grow my firm, my second and third firm, I had learned how to grow a firm, but I looked at an exit strategy from the day one and said, hey, I'm going to grow it to 5 million and I'm going to sell it. I don't think enough of our firms go in with an exit strategy. I think we go in thinking, well, I'm going to start a business and I'm going to make a lot of money and this is something that I love and I'm passionate about doing, but we don't really understand the long game. And I think a lot of it has got to be involved in mergers, acquisitions, and even to some degree, joint ventures.
No, that's tremendous. I appreciate that view. Thank you.
Not a problem.
We have another question that's come in as well. Apologies if this was already discussed. What resources are available to help companies with succession plans, to your point a minute ago, and and counseling for those family-owned and operated businesses?
Great question. I took over my family business. My father was in the business, and I took over from him. And I think that is one way that African Americans can create long-term wealth in our communities. As to work with family businesses, I was blessed enough to be able to sit with my father when I was in junior high school and understood how he made payroll, how he had to pay taxes, and how he had to buy supplies and hire and fire and grow the firm. And so from a young person's perspective, I understood the importance of entrepreneurship. But I think in today's market, there are a lot of young people that want to start businesses. I tell them all the time, don't. It is tough enough for you to start a business when you're, in your 30s or 40s, or you have had some experience under you working for someone else. I tell young people that are looking to go into business for themselves, man, go find someone that's doing something very similar to what it is you think you want to do. And as opposed to starting that firm, go volunteer or go work at nights in the evening. I worked at Coca-Cola my last career, and I would be there from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. each night. But I would leave at 8 p.m. and go work at McDonald's. And I worked at McDonald's from 8 to 12 because I wanted to understand the importance and how to run my own business. So many entrepreneurs leave corporate America with the skills that corporate America taught them, but they never were able to learn how to be an entrepreneur. And so to answer your question, I think you need to do a couple things. One, when you start your business, make sure you create a board of directors. Surround yourself with professionals that have the skills that we may not have, from legal to accounting to pricing, just the resources. We may be able to make the widget or sell the widget, but we got to have the other resources around us to be long-term successful.
Wonderful. So, and Ron, looking at the numbers, the facts speak for themselves. You have 300,000 members on average, 1.2 million in revenue. That translates to about 360 billion, if my math is correct. And my guess is that any insurance carrier or provider, whether it's commercial insurance or financial services, would be happy to tap into those numbers. How can we do a better job of bringing the right solutions to your base, working together through organizations like NAAIA and the Black Chamber?
Great question, and I'm sure I will have my corporate sales team following up. But I believe that there are resources that we could use that will continue to have the long-term success. I want to make sure that your listeners know that we have some of the largest Black firms in the country. So their numbers are included with some of the mid-sized firms. But I also want to tell you this. You can't start talking to us when we're at that $1 million level. We want you to talk to us when we're at that $150,000 annualized revenue number. Because I have very few businesses that say, hey, I am here. I have a relationship with my bank or my insurance company or my accountant, my lawyer, and because you called on me today, you have a better price or you have something, a slick brochure, I'm going to change my relationship with him. Most of our businesses, African Americans, are very, very conservative in nature, and we are also very consistent in our relationships. And so if you start with us, we will, in many cases, stay with you through the long haul, because we want you to understand our businesses, our relationships, our families, our concerns. And so I would tell your agents to, hey, look for us at those local chambers, make a commitment early on, be consistent in your message, and show that you care about our community, as opposed to, many people are just trying to close a deal. We really want relationships on how to grow our firms long term.
Okay. So Ron, there's an anonymous question that's come in, and it's, where can we locate businesses that are available for acquisition? Do you have any pearls of wisdom that you'd like to share in that regard?
Wow, I wish I did. And I would say, when I was buying my business, I was in Oakland, California, and down the street from us back in the 80s was San Jose. It wasn't known as Silicon Valley then. It was just San Jose, and San Jose was, if you know, was a rough community, but it was on the rise in reference to technology. I was trying to cut into the tech industry. Although I had worked at IBM and Xerox and had been a senior manager, they wouldn't even give me an interview to empty their trash because of relationships. And so what I did over the course of 6 months is I looked around the country to see where I could get the business that was already doing the type of business that I was looking for. I spent about 6 months. I learned everything I could about this particular firm, their employees, their customers, their banks, their suppliers, as well as their insurance agents. And when I finally had the opportunity to speak to the owner, I knew more about his business than he did. And literally, during a couple days session, I was able to purchase a $7.5 million firm for about $350,000. They're out there. We have to do our due diligence, and we have to be creative, but we also have to make sure that it's a good deal for the seller as well as the buyer. And a lot of that is just doing the right types of due diligence and bringing the right type of team and getting the right type of financing. I would also say that if you're looking to purchase a business, you need to be talking to the bank early about it, because the bank is going to want to know early on what the liabilities as well as the opportunity is for long-term ROI.
Thank you, Ron. And as just a wrap-up question, and you and I had some pretty good conversations, you and I and Reggie and the others had some great conversations pre-event. And I just would love it if you would share your perspective around what do you think is the relativity between the success of the U.S. Black Chamber and its members and the success of our country? Because this becomes more than just a Black piece, right? I mean, I would like you to just talk to that a minute.
Wow, great question. And I'll give two answers to that. The first one is, as African Americans, there is this myth that white folk ice is colder than ours. And if your audience is old enough to remember, before there were refrigerators, we used to have ice boxes. And my grandfather used to deliver ice. And he would tell me that he would deliver his ice to his white clients first thing Saturday morning. And if you remember, they would deliver the ice on the back of a truck. It would put it in your ice box, and it would keep your meats and fruits and vegetables fresh for 7 days. Well, by the time he got to his Black customers, our neighborhood, the ice had been sitting on that truck all evening, afternoon, and that ice had been melted down and chipped away. And so by the time it got to our ice boxes, it only lasted 5.5 days. I told my grandfather, Daddy Ray, I said, well, that was great for then, but in today's environment, because of a black man, we created the ice maker. So ain't nobody's ice colder than ours. I can get crushed ice, cubed ice, flavored ice, filtered ice, colored ice if I want to. And when we start seeing our communities and our businesses in the same vein, I don't care what other people think about us. We have the ability to be able to change our communities and outcome within our own communities and outcome. And I'll finish by saying over the last now 2.5, 3.5 years, we heard a lot about making America great again. And I say African Americans want America to be great as well. But in order for there to be a great America, there must be a great Black America. And in order for there to be a great Black America, we got to have great Black businesses. And the only way, one of the main ways you can have great Black businesses is to have great Black chambers. And so I think we're joined at the hip. When you see great Black chambers doing great work in local communities as well as in Washington, D.C., you'll see great Black communities as well as a great Washington, D.C., as well as a great company.
Okay. Well, just as you thought you were wrapping up, we've got another, and we've got 10 minutes. So
Okay.
I'm going to be very respectful of the time, yours and the audience. What value does or could the NAAIA organization and our individual chapters bring to local chambers of commerce organizations? I think that goes back to that question that was asked before about, partnerships and synergies. But Ron, do you have any other comments on that?
Well, no, I think that as local agents, you guys know about businesses that are looking to transition out. You guys know about opportunities that you can bring to our local chambers, our local businesses. You know about challenges that are happening in the local communities as well as the industry. If you look at our businesses that are in the U.S. Black Chamber, we used to say the number one concern was access to capital. Mm-hmm. Our business is saying it really is about policy and education. They want to know what is going on in the industry. We all hear about fake news, and we watch, all of us watch versions of CNN and our local stations, but we want to know from our local partners where they can take advantage of some of the new policies that are being created as it becomes insurance, how they can work there. They want to be able to provide wealth for their communities as well as their families. I think insurance is one of the ways in which we can do that. I believe in it. To create generational wealth, we have to start looking at insurance from a different vantage point as opposed to it being a monthly liability to bury us or to be able to take care of our last days. We really have to look at it long term as how are we going to create wealth. And in other communities, they understand that. I don't think we've had that conversation enough in our community that insurance really can change long-term dynamics in our communities in reference to wealth creation.
Absolutely. Thank you. And as a last question, as part of your objectives for Wealth 2020, it includes increasing home ownership. Do you also target increases in Black real estate investors? And if so, what insights can you recommend for building wealth for new investors?
Yeah. So I don't want your audience to be confused. It's not just home ownership. It really is about property ownership. Mm-hmm. There's two quotes that I'll use. One is by Frederick Douglass, where he says, "I'd rather own property than be someone's property." We are saying that conversation across the country. We must own property. Mm-hmm. Right now, as the question was asked about investor opportunities, the opportunity zones is a policy that's been created by this administration. A lot of people in our community that don't understand the rules and the opportunities from opportunity zones. And if we don't get behind it, it will affect us more so than anyone else. You're looking at communities, Baltimore, Chicago, Detroit, around the country, both rural and urban, that have our homes, our businesses in most of those areas, but we aren't talking about how can we now take advantage of the opportunity zones to be able to purchase some of those buildings and land and old dilapidated communities to be able to make sure that we get in front of this conversation, because that's not going to happen again. And there's not enough of us talking about that from an investment standpoint. And I think that's where we can definitely have a long-term play. And for those folks that are on the conversation that want to be able to follow back up with us, I'll be more than happy to leave my phone number so that we can continue that conversation. But I would say learn about opportunity zones in your local areas around the country. Take advantage of that. Pool our resources, pool our money. It's not just about home ownership, but it's about assets, buildings, as well as opportunities to be investors in land.
Ron, thank you so much. So before I turn it back over to Reggie for his closing remarks, I would just say on behalf of NAAIA as well, thank you. You've been a tremendous partner by joining us here this morning, sharing your insights with us, and especially knowing that you had a kind of very interesting trek up the East Coast in this weather with the train and everything else that went with it. So true example of pushing through and making it happen. So thank you very much.
Not a problem. There is no days off for civil rights, they say.
Yeah.
Reggie?
Yes, well, me as well. On behalf of NAAIA, I know we'd like to give Ron some virtual applause. I'd like to thank him for his leadership, his partnership, and service. And like you mentioned, the great Reggie Lewis, he is certainly a man that's achieving in every field of human endeavor. And Ron will know what that means.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. I will say that in closing, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to your members today. I had the opportunity to speak at your conference a few years back. It was one of my first opportunities to speak in front of a large audience. And to this day, I'm still running into your members who have appreciated that conversation. I also want to say that for those of you that are interested in meeting our business owners, meeting our chamber leaders, again, our national conference is August the 19th to the 22nd. It's in right outside of D.C., in Maryland at the National Harbor, the Gaylord Hotel. We'd love to have you guys participate, and you can find out more information on the U.S. Black Chamber at www.usblackchambers.org.
All right, that's great. And then two final logistical comments to our membership. Please join us on Wednesday, February 27th for the final segment of this month's programs. The official flyer and registration information should hit your emails, I believe, within the next hour. And last but certainly not least, our partners and friends at NAAFA in hosting the platform for these sessions. We really appreciate their amazing partnership and support as well. Everybody have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.